So this video is entitled Egyptian Gods in Solomon's Temple. And this goes to the argument I've been trying to make now for a while. This argument that, again, we like to think that history is a certain way, and that we're now in a time where the evil forces are taking over the world. This new world order is going to be instituted. And my argument is that, yeah, there's a world order, but there's nothing new about it. And that when you look at the different cultures throughout history and the different gods, if you examine it under a particular lens, you find that it's really just the same gods. From the beginning of recorded history, all the way back to the Sumerian culture. So who are these gods? What are they? What is their role? How do they relate to us? And who is this God of the Bible? This figure that three of the major world religions all worship, this God of Abraham. Because everybody thinks of the Bible God and you think of an old man sitting on a throne with a big long white beard. And that doesn't seem like it's it. It seems like it's something way deeper. So they've spun all these stories, these deceptions, and they painted us a history with like all these different religions and all these different gods. Why contend this? What if it's just the same gods, just interpreted differently throughout the different cultures and time periods throughout history? Who are these gods? How do they relate to the Bible, the Old Testament, that probably everybody knows about?
So I don't mean to mess with anybody's faith. If that's the case, just turn back now. But there's a lot of weird stuff in the Old Testament. And just remember, it was these guys that were the only ones that had access.
So the first thing he's saying is the Old Testament's weird. I think all of us could admit that. And then he's basically saying, like, look, throughout at least the last 2,000 years, close to it, again, if we're going to take any conception of history as given, which we don't have to do, but let's just use that as a framework. The Roman Catholic Church had access to the Bible, and it was written in Latin. So they basically disseminated the information. They basically did what they wanted with the information to paint a particular story.
Access to this for hundreds of years in Latin. They're the ones that told you that the Father Jesus was referring to is the God of Moses in the Old Testament. So the first people that heard about Jesus didn't have an official text. It took a long time for that to all get written.
Right, like in case you didn't know, when you read those four canonical Gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, they weren't written until 100 years after the supposed life of the Christ figure. You get it, guys? Like they weren't walking around behind him and writing everything down as it happened. It was 100 years after. Think about how long 100 years is. Think about what history was like 100 years ago from today and how different it was in 1924. So imagine something happening in 1924 and it not being written about until now, this time.
So people had totally different ideas of what Christianity was, and Marcion, for one, was under the impression that the loving God that Jesus spoke of is not the same as the vengeful, wrathful God of the Old Testament.
Many people who follow the understandings of the Christ figure do not associate him with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so many doctrine-believing churchians want to argue against the point I just made. They want to hold on to this particular God of the Israelites, the Hebrew God, as the creator of all, as the source, as the creator of spirit. There's many understandings that say, no, indeed, this Christ figure actually was speaking out against this God. And we could argue this till the cows come home, but I wanted to make that point because I think so many people just accept it as doctrine that Abba Father, spoken of in the New Testament scriptures, is this four-letter Yahweh or Jehovah. I contend that it is not. So do others.
But Marcion, the Gnostics, the Bogomils, the Cathars, and probably a few more, all.
If you ever look at the history of what happened to the Cathars when the Church of Rome was really doing the thing that it does in the Crusades, well, maybe you'll get an idea of what the issue is here. Because the Church of Rome did the best they could to try to wipe out any sects of Christianity who thought like this. Any sect of Christianity who was disassociating the Christ figure from the God of the Old Testament, well, they were dealt with, and they were dealt with pretty harshly. You could look at the Knights Templar, you could look at the Crusades, and then you could look at later at the Jesuit order of the Roman Catholic Church, which is basically a group of like mercenary monks.
All thought that the God of the Old Testament was not who Jesus was referring to. After all, he was constantly arguing with the Pharisees, and they were the ones that had him crucified. The Romans didn't want to. That being said, this is an artificial of inside of the Holy of Holies.
All right, so I want you guys to look. This is the Holy of Holies, which is a part of Solomon's temple. We've been talking about King Solomon, who he was, what he represented. He apparently had this temple. When you read descriptions about what was in the temple, you find these huge statues of the Sphinx, winged, plumed, dragon-like phoenix creatures. When you talk about the Sphinx, when you talk about the phoenix, and you talk about the dragon, we can consider them all similar kind of entities or the same thing. They're these flying beings that had humanoid characteristics. Sometimes they had snake-like characteristics. But he's pointing out here a simple but profound statement. Why were these winged sphinx-like creatures in Solomon's temple?
This is inside Solomon's temple. And then we have the for sure Sphinx carving down in the tunnel below. So why do the children of the one true God have the same statues as all of the false gods?
So then he basically pointed out how there's tunnels below Solomon's temple that to this day, when they excavated them, they found this Sphinx symbolism and iconography. Now he's going to relate these Sphinx characters to the more ancient gods of the Egyptians and the Sumerians. Same gods. You have to realize from the time of the Sumerians to the time of Solomon's temple is many thousands of years. Many thousands of years. But they're still the same gods.
False gods of the surrounding areas. Everybody knows about the Egyptian Sphinx, but all throughout the region you have the same winged lions and even winged lions with winged people. And here's Taurus. That dude's got to be 25 foot tall.
So showing a depiction of Horus, the Egyptian deity, and associating Horus with the Sumerian depictions that you see here. You're looking at an Egyptian depiction of Horus. If I go back, there's a Sumerian depiction. These are the same beings.
25 foot tall. Gilgamesh was a big boy too, holding a lion like a...
All right, Gilgamesh, you see, is a more traditional giant, more human characteristics. Likely Gilgamesh was one of the Nephilim, these men of renown, which were likely the offspring of these fallen ones.
Like a kitty cat. But everybody in the region has these for the old gods. So why would these be in a temple to the one true God? They looking off.
Do you see how the Sphinx are standing over the Ark of the Covenant there? This is depicted in Solomon's Temple. Also, remember the link that Solomon's Temple has with the Masons, the Masonic order. All of the Masonic symbolism is based off the Solomonic tradition. The pillars, the symbols, all of it starts there. I'm trying to break everybody's cog dis because you want to think of the God of the Bible in a particular way. I'm trying to show you something. This man giving the presentation, he's trying to show you something. You keep wanting to tell me it's a new world order. It's just a world order. The Sumerian gods were passed down through the Egyptians and the Greeks to the Romans, and Rome never fell. Rome went underground into the Roman Catholic Church, the Church of Rome. It ruled all through the supposed fall of Rome, through the Dark Ages, then through the Renaissance and the humanistic tradition. They infiltrated the secret societies and the mystery schools, and they're wielding power to this day in conjunction with the people we call the Khazarians in what has been titled the Unholy Alliance. The alliance between the Roman Catholic Church, which is basically just a front for these gods, and our small hatty friends who control the banking, which I think they're just worshiping another version of the gods. It's very likely brothers, warring families, warring quote-unquote deities that are bloodline in and of themselves, likely vying for power over humanity.
An awful lot like the false gods that God told them to stay away from. But evidently these are cherubs from the Bible. Some would say that this is
Cherubim were considered a class of angels or angelic beings.
just a symbolic representation of God's might, which I can understand. Got the body of a lion signifying strength, the head of a man signifying wisdom, and then wings because he could fly. But other people in the region had the same ideas about their false gods.
There's a Sumerian depiction there.
So let's look at Psalms 18. In my distress, I called upon the Lord. Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken. There went up a smoke out of his nostrils and fire out of his mouth. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also and came down, and darkness was under his feet. And he rode upon a cherub and did fly. Yea, he did fly upon the wings of the wind.
So this is the God of Abraham, apparently, in Psalms that they were just speaking of. Does that sound like an old man with a nice beard who looks like Santa Claus? No. It sounds like a dragon. It sounds like a phoenix, a plumed serpent flying phoenix.
Just going to transliterate this a bit, but around his pavilion were thick, dark clouds of the sky, and he shot out his arrows, lightning. So in just plain English, they're saying, yeah, he really did fly in this dark cloud that was so big it cast a shadow below him, the darkness at his feet. There was this loud thundering noise that shook the earth, and he shot out lightning and destroyed the enemies. And they use the term dark clouds around his pavilion. In the book of Job's also, can any understand the spreading of the clouds or the noise of his tabernacle? And they make it clear that his tabernacle is up in the sky. In the book of Exodus, he leads them out of Egypt with a pillar of smoke during day and a pillar of fire at night that descends nightly on the tabernacle once they get to the point that they build it. Now,
so this guy's laying it down. He's basically pulling different sections of the Old Testament Bible, and he's showing indeed who this God of Abraham may be, and associating this God of Abraham with these more ancient gods. There appears to be no difference. Again, to me, it's quite likely that they're the same beings, just with a rivalry. Just like you would see now with maybe some type of rivalry over a royal bloodline. Who's going to take the throne? Who's going to rule? Who's next in line for the throne?
Now, in building the Ark of the Covenant, he tells them to put 2 cherubim on top of it out of solid gold with their wings facing towards each other like a arc reactor or something. I'll talk about that in another video. But you got these winged creatures on the ark. And then with making the fabric for the tent of the tabernacle, he says to weave in all of these cherubim winged creatures into it. But why is God telling these people that will basically worship anything at a drop of a hat to decorate with these winged creatures that are a lot like the Egyptian and Sumerian gods? And what that guy's holding is also known as the cosmic thunderbolt, which can be found Zeus, Odin, all these different gods. And we just talked about his flying tabernacle that thundered in the heavens and shot out lightning. Some other weird stuff, but there is no star in the Bible associated with David. But there are 2 references. You've borne the tabernacle of your Moloch, the star of your god, which you made yourselves. And then in Acts, the star of your god Remphan.
Right. The Star of Remphan. There's no Star of David. So who are they representing? The Star of David that we find on the Israeli flag. Is it David? Is it the tribe of Judah? Is it the line of Abraham? Or is it something else?
So Moloch and Remphan are both associated with Saturn.
Saturn. Saturn.
And the old school Saturn worship. This is also associated with the seal of Solomon, which controlled demons. And everybody knows this is on a certain flag today. But Solomon gave himself up to Saturn worship, built altars to Asheroth and Moloch. And this seal of Solomon was used in Egyptian magic and witchcraft. David had absolutely nothing to do with the hexagram, and the star most certainly didn't represent God's people. But the Bible...
Hexagram. Hex. You place a hex on somebody, like a curse or a spell. Again, the stories of Solomon and his consorting of these demons, his sigil magic, as we've been reviewing, these all come together.
The Bible is full of instances of the Hebrews turning away from God, worshiping other gods. And it seems to me like these stories got intertwined and intermixed. I mean, Moses was raised as a prince of Egypt, so that could certainly account for the Sphinx similarities.
Many people overlook this. Moses was a prince of Egypt. He's also basically the father of Israelite history, doctrine, and tradition. Moses apparently wrote the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. He's apparently responsible for those books. The Prince of Egypt. Do you see the link here? The Jewish religion, the Israelites, are linked to the Egyptian culture. Direct link. Same gods, same people, same everything. We think it's all different. It's not. You have to remember that the story of Abraham, the story of the Israelites, is the progenitor of 3 of the largest religions that remain to this day: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. It's just a continuation of these older stories, same gods, different names. I think there's a number of them.
A story by Manasseh says that there was an attack on the temple, and this was a much later date, but they went into the Holy of Holies and came out with a huge golden donkey head. Now, even the high priests only went into the Holy of Holies once a year, and nobody else was allowed to. But in another story, this guy, Zechariah, he becomes a high priest, and he goes into the temple, and there's all of this incense burning, and it's really smoky, and he can barely see. And then finally, this head of a golden donkey pops out to him, and he freaks out. He runs outside and wants to yell to everybody that, do you guys realize we're worshiping a donkey in there? But then he's struck dumb and can't talk. Now, you ready for this? You know what other god has a donkey's head? The Egyptian god Set. And Set was kind of this dark evil, I don't know if evil's the right word, but dark god, the god of chaos, war, and storms. So once again, we're back to the lightning, cosmic thunderbolt motif. And if you
There we go. Another Egyptian god associated with the Israelites. A lot of people say that it was in the time of Solomon where the Israelites became associated with these other gods and sort of went against the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who to me was just probably one of amongst these gods. The Gnostics called Yahweh Yaldabaoth. If I had to guess, Yaldabaoth was very likely, Yahweh was very likely the same character depicted by the Sumerians by the name of Enlil. He had a brother named Enki. Enki could be more the Satan archetype, potentially this Saturn archetype that seems to have been introduced in the time of Solomon, because Solomon married into the line of Canaan. Apparently, the Israelites were not supposed to breed with the Canaanites. If you remember, they're actually were supposed to wipe them out. They were their sworn enemy. Well, why? Is it possible that each sect, the Canaanites and then the Israelites, were basically just aligned with a particular god? Again, potentially brothers warring for power. They talked about the star of Remphan and how it relates to Moloch, and how it was the time of Solomon where Moloch worship was integrated into the Israelite tradition. Well, let's think about it. The star of Remphan, the star, the hexagram, and as he said, its association with Saturn. Well, Saturn and Satan sound pretty close, don't they? Saturn was a Roman god. Supposed to be the god of time, the god of regeneration, dissolution, and periodic renewal. Well, we talk about cataclysms, we talk about reset events, renewal events. Could it be related to this god Saturn? Why are they so interested in this Saturn? Saturn, if you look in Roman tradition, Saturn has a son named Jupiter. Jupiter in Greek was called Zeus in the earlier Greek tradition. Zeus. Well, what was the New Testament written in? It was written in Greek. What did they call the Christ figure? Jesus. 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 The Greek name for Jesus was Isus or Isus. Isus, Jesus, hail Zeus. Zeus. Are they saying that this Christ figure is basically related to this Zeus figure, who was called Jupiter by the Romans and was the son of this Saturn? You start to see the link here. You start to see how it's all incestual. The point remains is that if you look across all these multiple cultures, you start to see similarities and synchronicities amongst these gods and amongst these various religions. To me, it paints a story. It paints a story of some type of non-human entities that appear to have been subjugating humanity since the beginning of recorded history, and probably longer. I'll say it again. It's not a new world order. It's just a world order. We're just waking up to it.